In the last episode, we explored the question, what is the corporate education reform model? In this episode, we look at who is behind the corporate education reform model in Dallas. We are joined by two public education advocates and parents to discuss the funding of school board races in Dallas and education politics in Texas.
My name is Lori Kirkpatrick, and I am the mother of a Dallas ISD fifth grader. I am also a former Dallas ISD school board candidate, and I am very passionate about public education.
And I'm Lynn Davenport, and I'm also a public school parent. I live in Dallas, but my kids are zoned for Richardson ISD, where I formerly ran for a seat on the board. And I've been tracking the money behind the corporate education reform movement and also the money behind the test and punish standardized testing culture imposed on our kids.
So who is behind the corporate education reform model in Dallas?
We like to call it three Mikes, a Todd and a Ken. We can start with, so Mike Miles was the superintendent in DISD from 2012 to 2015. He brought with him from Colorado the merit-based pay system that DISD now uses. This created a great deal of turmoil in the district, a lot of disruption. We had a mass exodus of our teachers' workforce. With that went many veteran teachers and, of course, the institutional memory of the teaching process in the district. Second, I think in our DISD reform agenda is Ken Barr. He is a tech entrepreneur. He has really been on the ground floor of funding many of the reform organizations here in Dallas, including Dallas Kids First and Leadership ISD. He personally has spent over $500,000 to fund these reform groups in Dallas, and much of that he does through one of his companies called Symphonic Source. Todd Williams is another of the big reformers here in Dallas. He's a Goldman Sachs real estate investor who retired from that in 2009 and began working here in Dallas on education reform at that time. Just prior to his retirement there, he started a charter school, which is called Williams Prep, is affiliated now with Uplift. He served on the Uplift board, the charter school board, and has given millions of dollars to Uplift. He also brought the Teach for America group to Dallas by founding the Dallas-Fort Worth TFA network. And he was the education policy advisor for our mayor, Mike Rawlings, even though he has absolutely zero experience in education. He additionally established the Commit Partnership, which is a big reform organization here in Dallas, and he is on the board of Leadership ISD. He personally has a foundation, the Todd and Abby Williams Foundation, that funds Commit, Teach for America, and Leadership ISD. They additionally funded Carla Garcia, who is employed by Commit and now a trustee on the DISD board. Mike Morath was elected to the school board in 2011. Actually, he was unopposed, but was on the Dallas school board from 2011 through 2015. He was the mastermind of what was known as Home Rule. He wanted to remove the elected school board in Dallas and have the schools operate under the mayoral control under Mike Rawlings, who was the mayor at that time. He was very supportive and instrumental in bringing in Superintendent Miles and the merit pay system. He himself was a substitute teacher for a few months. That, in conjunction with his DISD school board tenure, gave him the credentials, according to Governor Abbott, to become the TEA commissioner. So he is now in charge of education in the state of Texas through the Texas Education Agency. We have also, of course, Governor Abbott, who has been an enormous promoter of charter schools in the state. and has obviously under his leadership passed several bills. He appointed Mike Morath as the TEA commissioner, and he appointed Todd Williams to serve on the Texas Commission of Public School Finance, both of whom have brought Dallas initiatives to the state level. And then finally, we mentioned Mayor Mike Rawlings. He was the mayor of Dallas from 2011 to 2019. He did want as well to rid Dallas of its elected school board and take over control of the Dallas Independent School District through the home rule. He appointed Todd Williams as his education policy advisor for those 8 years. Again, a man that had zero experience in education was advising the mayor of the city on education. He is also an advocate for Texas Aspires, which is a charter lobby group in Austin. And he quite famously made a comment about there being plenty of money to be made in education.
From real estate to education, I'll tell you, big industry education. I mean, huge. There's a lot of money to be made in education. And a lot of people say, you're not supposed to make money in education. I'll tell you, it's our greatest need in the United States of America in the 21st century.
So what have politicians like Greg Abbott and Mike Morath done to accelerate the corporate reform model in Texas?
Well, I think it's an important distinction to understand that Greg Abbott is on the right and Mike Morath is on the left. So this is a bipartisan effort. And what we've seen is the reforms that have been taking place in Dallas, such as merit pay and the teacher, the Accelerated Campus Excellence Program, which is a teacher stipend program. Those have been, they're trying to scale those statewide. And so you'll see these myths being perpetuated by the governor where he says you can make 6 figures in Dallas ISD when in reality there are only a handful of people making maybe $90,000. They're not even making 6 figures a year. So it's disingenuous. You'll also see the push for outcomes-based education, which we really tried to fight with House Bill 3, which came through the last legislative session.
You know, Abbott came in 2015, and that year through the legislative session, there was passage of House Bill 1842, and that is how we now have the District of Innovation policy, which is concerning in that districts can choose to eliminate teacher certification by implementing a District of Innovation program. And
yeah, there were a number of exemptions listed in House Bill 1842. Now, Senate Bill 1882 is really more of a backdoor privatization takeover bill where school districts can enter into a partnership with a charter-like entity. So they can turn a preschool into a charter it's a charter agreement. Literally, it turns them into a charter.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remind people that House Bill 1842 allows the TEA commissioner, an appointed individual, which is Mike Morath, to come in and take over and remove an elected school board. And as Lynn mentioned, that's exactly what's going on now in the process for Houston ISD, and has gone on in other school districts in Texas. And then, as she mentioned, Senate Bill 1882, the Charter Partnership Program is a financial incentive for districts to privatize with a private entity through what's called this Charter Partnership. And when they do so, they actually get more money than if they did not.
So rather than providing upfront funding for the schools and the district, they back them into a corner. So if you want the money, then you have to agree to forego your rights as a district and hand over the oversight and the governance to a nonprofit or some sort of private entity. And I also want to go back and talk about Mike Morath was actually appointed to the Next Generation Accountability and Assessments Commission, which is the what they're basically talking about the future of the accountability system. And his application to the TEA, there isn't one. His application that they used for him to be commissioner was for him to be on that STAR commission, the Next Generation Accountability and Assessments Commission. So if you look at it, we pulled his application, and he has listed Todd Williams as one of his references on that. So he's actually not applied to be a TEA commissioner.
And so how much money is pouring into Dallas school board elections?
A lot.
So if you go back to 2011, there was very little money in the school board races. People just weren't that interested, and some of the seats they were unopposed. But if you look at around 2012, that's when the money really started pouring in.
You could win a school board election with a few $1,000s, $2,000, $3,000 in Dallas. Now, the year that I ran was 2017, and I took in just over $50,000, but my opponent, Dustin Marshall, who is the current trustee, took in over $300,000 just for that race against me. And so when we looked at the 1.5-year time frame from when Dustin Marshall started his DISD campaign, which began January of 2016 and went through July of 2017, he took in over $500,000, which is just astronomical for a local school board election, an unpaid position that, just a few years prior could have been won with $2,000 or $3,000. And when you look at who is actually funding that, Dallas Kids First, one of the reform organizations that have been started here, have taken in over $2 million just for Dallas ISD school board elections. And that's an enormous funder that's calling the shots, if you will, on who gets these positions in DISD. One individual that we mentioned earlier, Ken Barth, has given over $500,000 to Dallas Kids First.
Oh, I sat down with Thomas Oltekung not long ago to discuss the big donors behind Dallas ISD. You've done a lot of research on the corporate education reform as it relates to Dallas schools. What, as far as you've seen, has been the impact on these reform initiatives on Dallas ISD?
Well, so they hired Mike Miles in 2012, and he came to Dallas, and he instituted this teacher initiative, this teacher evaluation program. I think it's called TEI, something like that. And
Teachers Excellence Initiative.
And he also introduced merit pay. Well, what that's done is that's driven a lot of veteran teachers out of Dallas, and they also at the same time opened Dallas up to Teach for America. So they don't have nearly as good a teaching workforce as they had 6 years ago or 8 years ago, because this Teacher Excellent Initiative really did the opposite. It made turnover higher, and it drove out veteran teachers.
In terms of Dallas, are there particular donors that you've picked up on that are trying to influence locally here?
Let's see. I wrote some notes about this. Let me see if I can. So you've got Garrett Boone. He's the guy that started the Container Stores. Benny Bray, guy from Monarch Capital. And Harlan Crow, he's the Crow Family Holdings, and he did the George Bush Foundation and Library, and he's a AEI board of director. And then one that's kind of surprising is Stacy Schusterman. And Stacy Schusterman's a billionaire from Tulsa that's the CEO of Samson Energy. And she inherited Samson Energy from her parents. And she donates all over the country to this kind of privatization movement. And then, of course, John Arnold from Houston has put a lot of money into. He was a big supporter of Mike Morath's. What did they call that? Where he tried to privatize the entire district, the home rule district.
All right. And as far as Mike Morath, who's now TEA commissioner, he was Dallas board trustee during the rollout of many of these initiatives. Is that right?
Well, Mike Morath was the first board of trustee member, candidate to be backed by the chamber. And they have a couple groups there. Off the top of my head, as like Dallas Students First, and there's another one. There's two of these big PACs, and he was the first one to get big money from them, and he was their first board member. And so he ran in 2011 unopposed, and still spent over $16,000 in campaign funding, and took in $28,000. The two other candidates that ran in that election took in no money and spent no money because they were all unopposed. And that was 2011. And since then, it's become extraordinarily expensive to run for school board in Dallas. And especially interesting was the Lori Kirkpatrick 2017 run, where she took 49.8% of the vote in the primary, and then in the general got stomped because her opponent, who ran against her, Dustin Marshall. Yeah, Dustin Marshall took in over $338,000, outspent her 6-1, and just stomped her. But Kirkpatrick's backing was really kind of impressive.
Charter schools don't thrive without a TFA group in your community, because much of their workforce will be through TFA. And
Teach for America is a $400 million nonprofit. They received money through the federal stimulus package in 2009. So this is a national network of reform-minded candidates. A lot of them are unsuspecting, and they get into education. They're promised, as long as they give the 2-year commitment, that they are promised boards and commissions, and they become part of this patronage network across the country. So they just put in those 2 years. Now there are some that stay behind, and they actually stay in the classroom, and they view it as a calling. So not all Teach for America candidates leave the classroom, but the majority of them do.
Yeah, and we have 3 of our trustees in Dallas are former Teach for America. That's Miguel Solis, Ben Mackey, and Justin Henry. And they, of course, all 3 were supported by Dallas Kids First and financially, with also provided with door knockers to go out and canvass to help get them elected. We actually have 2 trustees in Dallas who are charter school board trustees as well. Dustin Marshall was on the Uplift Charter School Board just prior to coming on to DISD, and Edward Flores was simultaneously on ILT, or International Leadership Charter School, while on the DISD School Board. He has just recently stepped down from ILT's board.
And it's a major conflict of interest, which is never enforced. Whether they have one or not, there doesn't seem to be any enforcement of these conflicts of interest. And as far as recusing themselves from some of these votes, who's watching that?
And so to illustrate how close the ties are between these education nonprofits, PACs, and various entities, we've pulled up a short clip of Ken Barth speaking at the January Dallas ISD board meeting.
Hi, my name is Ken Barth. I live at 10456 Countess Drive in Dallas, Texas, and I think I've seen a lot of old friends in this room and up at the table. So I'm a huge believer in DISD, as most of you that know me. My kids My volunteer hours and what little money I have go to initiatives to try to support DISD.
And so, how close are the ties between the organizations that are buying school board election seats and the nonprofits creating the programs and initiatives being sold to school districts like Dallas ISD?
Well, the ties are very close because you can see that the same people have their hands in every pot. And by that, I don't even mean that they are going to necessarily make money. And I've received messages from some of these known powerful reformers saying, I don't make a dime off of this. That's not the point. The point is power, money, and access and control. And so whether they make money off of it or not, the whole ecosystem has people that do make money off of it. So the people are given jobs inside Dallas ISD. They are given jobs in other districts. They are put in powerful positions at the TEA. And they have access to contracts, and they can steer contracts. They can give preferential treatment through RFPs, and you can see it happening at the state level and the local level. As far as their connections, you can see the connections to the PACs, the donors.
They're actually all interconnected and basically funded by, maybe a couple of dozen people, a few of which we're naming here today, but these names come up over and over again in these various campaign donation lists and these nonprofits that we're talking about. TFA is the other one. As I said, many people come out of the classroom after 2 or 3 years and come to work in these reform communities for these organizations. We have them on our school board. We have 2 of them who started the Teaching Trust, which is based out of SMU, our local college. Teaching Trust has a, I think, $12.2 million contract right now with DISD. They come in and
they're also in Richardson ISD, huge contracts in both districts.
They come in and they train our leaders in our district and our educators on essentially standardized test learning. Basically, how do we get our kids to do better on standardized tests?
And they'll say they're data driven, and that sounds good. Data informs decisions, but that data really, it all goes back to the overemphasis on the test and punish culture and the standardized test, which we all know is a poor measure of learning.
Yeah. And a couple of other TFA organizations or individuals. We have John Hill in the community who has founded this organization called CAMP, the Campaign Activity Management Program. It is essentially a Canvas training for what they call their fellows. And then they're funded by Dallas Kids First. Dallas Kids First pays these fellows to go out and then door knock to get the reform candidates elected. And so they're just, it's a web of reform individuals who come up over and over again in the same groups.
Why are these figures pumping so much money into Dallas school board elections?
Well, regardless of the reason, I think it's important for people to understand that this form of manipulation, it's manipulating the outcomes of elections, and it circumvents the democratic process when they stack the boards with their people, when they are able to influence contracts and they're able to manipulate the outcomes. Then where's the vote and the voice of the people? I think that it removes the taxpayer voice and those who have a vested interest with kids in the public schools.
Yeah, and I think for the reasons we were discussing today, locally anyway, the players here had a bigger agenda. They needed to see these reforms put in place in Dallas. They needed to show certain quote-unquote outcomes, and their intention was to take it statewide and to roll out the reforms across the state. And that's why it was so important that they defeat me during the election in 2017, because if I had won, I was not in favor of TEI, the merit pay system, and we would have had the votes to be able to dissolve that in the district. So it was imperative that I not get on the board, and it was worth clearly over $300,000 to them. Now, many of the people that help fund their processes are local, very wealthy. Many of them have individual private funds, family foundations, and they have investment firms, they have real estate businesses, and their interest is purely financial. It's for the gain, financial gain for privatization of public education.
In the next episode, we'll take a look at what corporate education reform looks like in Dallas and its impact on our communities and teacher workforce.